we watched Andy Stanley preach his message. Then I made my way up front, elbowing people out of the way, and I shook his hand. I said, Andy, that was a great message. Can I get 10 minutes of your time? And he goes, no. Just like that. He goes, no. And I remember thinking to myself, what a jerk.
Pastor Collin, you are the lead pastor of Nona Church.
Yep.
You've been preaching at Grace some. Recently, you just spoke and you mentioned that Pastor Mike's one of the mentors in your life. How did this start? Tell me about your relationship. I genuinely do not know. How did y'all meet? How did it get going?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'll just say this, we are deeply grateful to Pastor Mike, to Kelly, and the team here at Grace. I wish you could be in our staff meetings. A lot of the times what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how to steward what God has entrusted us to. As we say, well, what has Grace done in the past? And then it's picking up the phone to call Pastor Mike or Stacy, my wife, scheduling a meeting with Kelly. And so we are indebted to Grace in so many ways to the future that God has given us, as well as just their generosity of spirit and their care for us as a couple, and also as we think about leading our church. And so it's really started in some ways where we saw what Grace was doing, reached out to Pastor Mike, super generous with his time. And from that point on, it's been a really good relationship, and super grateful for him and what God's doing in the city.
Yeah, we're grateful for them too. I got to say that mentorship is reciprocal. I admire so much of what they are doing over there. Nona Church is the fastest growing church in the Nona area, but beyond that, it's one of the fastest growing churches in Orlando. Mm-hmm. And he and Stacy are just tremendous leaders. Both of them lead over there and just really have a heart for Jesus, which I love. A lot of churches will grow, but some churches will grow. But I would say these guys are perfectly planted there to do exactly what God wants them to do. And I think Collin will be one of, if not the biggest pastor down the road.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's high praise.
Yeah,
So
we're grateful.
Collin, you reached out to Grace to kind of say, let me learn from you guys. And then that's how you guys got to be friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were fans from afar, I think is a good way to put it. And
you found him online?
Yeah. And just watching the work. And I think beyond just finding them online, I've been in Orlando since I was in elementary school. And so even when I was in high school, I was aware of what Grace was doing back at Edgewater High School days. And so just to see the journey, Pastor Mike and Kelly's faithfulness, we've always respected the work that they do. But over the last couple of years especially, we've been really inspired and grateful to be able to have a closer relationship.
I just thought of a question. I'm like, I don't know if I can ask this. Can I ask you how old you are? You look very young.
Well, I don't know if I'm young anymore. I feel like I'm in the middle school of adulthood.
That's a good way to put it.
Which is, I'm 36.
You're 36.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he is young.
Yeah, you are young.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're talking today some about intergenerational relationships too, and so Mike, I know, is like a mentor to you. What is one of the biggest things you've learned from him and in your relationship?
Oh, wow. To limit that to one thing would be hard, so I'll give you two.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That's great.
I think one of it is he's exceptionally generous. And I think when I think about how I want to invest in other people, I think Mike has done a great job of modeling generosity of time, generosity of knowledge, and authenticity as he shares that has been really kind and gracious. And I'd say the second thing is he's a prolific preacher. And so watching somebody command the scriptures the way that he does and then be able to connect it to everyday life has been something I've really, really valued. I think we live in a culture nowadays where people say you can either be great at preaching the text, but miss the people, or be great at meeting people where they are, but not really engage the text. And I think as I've watched Pastor Mike and learned from him, you can do both. And so we're grateful for both his just ability to be a prolific communicator, but also the way that he's a generous and kind mentor. I kind of want to become that kind of person as the years go by, and hopefully our ministry will be marked by those same values.
Yeah, awesome. Mike, have you learned anything from this young tyke over here?
Well, the first thing, and I would just say this, I bet this is true for everybody that meets Collin. He is a person who honors. And what I love about that is that he's constantly thinking about the other person and how to lift them up. So he's way ahead of what he's saying right now. I think he's well on the road and far down that road, actually. So I admire that about him tremendously.
It's very kind of you.
Both of you have recently done series about next generation kind of stuff. Mike, you just did this whole series on like the pillars of graces, what y'all value.
Yep.
Why do you think it's so important to bring along the next generation? That's one of y'all's pillars is next gen leadership.
Yeah. I think it's important because it's the church. I mean, it's the next generation of the church, and we're going to hand that church off. I think Grace has always been about next gen leadership. We have a focus that's a little bit clearer and more laser focused right now. But I mean, honestly, Kelly and I are a good 10 to 15 years older than almost everybody on staff, with just a few exceptions. So for us, and I think this is true from generation to generation, you have a tendency to look at the next generation and think terrible thoughts about them. And I just never felt like that about the generation that was coming up behind me. I remember, so I'm a Gen Xer, right? Mm-hmm. My parents were baby boomers. The one behind me are millennials, and then behind that's Gen Z. And now we have Gen Alpha, which is all the way up to about 15 years old right now. And so when the millennials first came out, I would listen to baby boomers basically saying things like, they're so lazy and entitled. And yet at the same time, this is a generation that became the largest entrepreneurial group in American history. They also gave us the 4-day work week. So thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't translate to the church, but for the rest of the world, that's a wonderful thing. And so for me, like looking at all that they were and all that they were becoming, we invested heavily in starting to hire 20-year-olds just a few years ago. And I replaced some 50-something-year-old guys with some 20-year-olds that have done an exceptional job. And these guys are 21, 22 years old right now, and they have huge positions inside of our church. So for me, investing in the next generation is not like an option. It's the only way for the church to move forward into the future.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think so much of what has been happening in the last number of years is this high skepticism about who the next generation is going to become has been a misappropriated fear.
Yes.
When in reality, I think what young leaders are looking for are mentors. What young leaders are looking for are opportunities. And I think when we can create spaces and environments where that happens, it is a game changer. And so I think so often when we think about what does it look like to reach the next generation, a huge part of that is, are you passionate about the church?
That's right.
And if you're passionate about the local church, reaching the generation that is to come behind you, the future leaders, is an essential part of the strategy and needs to be a core element of any church that's trying to have a legacy beyond the current moment.
You know, and it's funny because when we're talking about next generation, we're not just talking about the generation right behind you.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to go watch this with this young man in our church. His name's Austin. And Austin is 12. All right. And he said, Pastor Mike, I'm giving my testimony at the church at like a student thing. And he's like, would you come? And I was like, absolutely.
He's 12?
He's 12.
Giving his testimony?
Yeah, he's giving a testimony. And I said, are you nervous? He goes, no, I was made for this.
Let's go.
Wow.
And I was like, bro, okay. So I was kind of excited, but a little nervous. You know, I don't want to, bust the bubble. And he gets up on stage, and he was amazing.
That's beautiful.
And I gave him a big hug afterwards, and then I went directly to his parents. And I was like, Austin has it. Yeah. Like, this kid could be an amazing preacher. And so now I've got my eye on him, and he and I are talking because I told him afterwards, I said, listen, you could grow up and lead the church, man.
Get that boy on the podcast. Where is he?
We can bring Austin on, and I'm telling you right now, he would do well.
That's
amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, he's gifted. We were talking about beforehand, like some people are just natural communicators, and some are natural leaders. And I think it's important for us to be able to look, way further down that chain than we think to identify spiritual giftings and aptitudes that the church needs in the future. Because we are the body. And, if we're not developing that body over time, it begins to atrophy and then it begins to die. It's what we see in mainline denominations across the country right now. Yep. They're dying because they grew old.
It's funny, I was just talking to some 20-somethings before I came here, and I was like, tell me, what would you find interesting thinking about the next generation? And they're like, we're not the next generation. What are you talking about? Like, that's like the teenagers. And I was thinking every generation thinks of yourself as the primary generation. It's like, well, I know better than I think I do have a little bit of the come on, the upcoming generation.
Yeah.
I am raising teenagers though, and maybe that's some of it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I wasn't born yesterday. I can still teach you a thing or two. But then there's the older one above me, and that's my framework. So what would you say to someone who, you guys are pastors, you're like in this world, but to the average listener who's going, I don't care much about other generations, like how do I get out of the framework of only seeing it through my lens? How do I begin to believe maybe I could learn something from the younger generation if I'm kind of skeptical about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so much of it is a recognition that the Holy Spirit does not limit itself to a particular generation, right? And so just like Pastor Mike mentioned, a 12-year-old sharing his testimony, God can use that in powerful ways. And I mean, if we look at the storyline of the scriptures, the disciples themselves were, generally speaking, teenagers, and Jesus sends them out 2 by 2 to go be his ambassadors and administrators in the earliest days of his public ministry. And so I think the model is Jesus. Like if Jesus is willing to entrust the most important thing, which is the gospel message to young teenagers, then we ought to make sure that we're at the very least having that kind of vision and passion that our Savior had. And so I think so often we can forget that God uses people that are humble, that are available, and who are willing to trust him for big things. And oftentimes that younger generation, or the generation that is coming behind us, they have that kind of passion. And I think that when we can merge the wisdom of an older generation with the passion of a younger generation, something beautiful unfolds in the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
That's really well said.
I mean, this is the relationship that Paul and Timothy had. I mean, 2 Timothy, 1:1 is Paul basically saying, don't let people despise you for being young. He's like, don't be afraid. And I love that admonition, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
And when it says young there, it means, so 2 Timothy was written right around the time that Paul writes it, right around the time that Timothy is like 30 years old. So prior to that, on his first missionary journey, Timothy's hanging out with Paul, but he's like 19. And so Paul was not afraid to pull people in at a younger age. Just like Collin said, the Holy Spirit can work through anyone. But I don't think it's an option. I think it's absolutely necessary for us to start doing this, because that generation is going to be discipled by someone. And it's going to be discipled by the church, or it's going to be discipled by culture. And if culture gets a handle on these people and casts a vision for their future, and there are beautiful, we talk a lot about this around the Grace Church, about the more beautiful story. Yeah. There's a counterfeit beautiful story, and there's the real one. And if the world can cast that counterfeit story in the heart of a generation, then they will grow up far from God. But if the church gets a hold of that generation and starts talking to them about Jesus, which is, I think, the most beautiful story, then it can change the entire world.
So I'm curious, what would you guys say is the counterfeit story right now for our generation, for the current, like we could say Gen Zers? What is the story culture spinning?
That's a great question. And I would say that the counterfeit story of this generation is actually the counterfeit story for every generation. I think about as Christians, we believe that there is an enemy that is opposed to the things of God and opposed to God's people. And if you look at Babylon in the Old Testament as kind of this archetype or narrative picture of how the enemy works and functions, which is how it's described in Revelation as well. What we see in Babylon, just go read Daniel chapter 1, a really great kind of space here. What you'll find in Daniel chapter 1 is that the enemy's strategy to undermine faith in a generation comes down to some pretty key things. The first one is identify the influencers. If you look at Babylon, and as they approach Israel and take the people of Israel into exile, they remove them from their home nation. People like Daniel are named because they were the royalty of the Israelite class. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in The Tipping Point. You don't need everybody to buy into a narrative.
Absolutely.
You just need a few influential people to do that. And I think that that's the enemy's plan. If he can get influential people in any generation to believe the lie about who they are, that has a downward impact on the generation as a whole. After that, if you can get the influencers, it's about re-education. The next thing that you see in Daniel is that they read language and literature that was by the Babylonians. I was looking at a statistic recently that I think is really interesting. Over the course of a lifetime, a child will spend 15,000 hours getting educated. if we take people at our church that maybe come 40 times a year, which is like a good number, right?
That's
if
great.
we take people at our church that are coming 40 times a year, and they check their kids into, compelling kids environments, that's going to be 520 hours before they graduate. So we're looking at a 15,000 hour versus 520 hour dynamic. And I'm not advocating for a particular educational structure. What I'm advocating for is parents being engaged in the stories that children are listening to and recognizing what is the narrative that they're experiencing. So I think it's about identifying influencers, it's about education, and then I think it's about shaping identity. The last thing that you'll notice that Babylon tries to do is he takes these Jewish boys and removes their names and reframes their names by giving them names that are connected to the Babylonian god. The original names of those young men were connected to Yahweh, the Hebrew God, and they changed the names. And I think that we see that in every single culture. So I think generationally, the real question is, what is the name that culture is trying to place on a generation, and how do we point them to the greater name that has called them into a relationship with him?
So what is the name, you would say, for the current generation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there's a couple. I think in the same way that there are a number of names that are given.
Probably.
I think that there are. I think, it's interesting. I think something's happening right now that I am really excited about, where I think you're seeing a lot of Gen Z Christians in particular, or Gen Z influencers coming to faith. I think we're seeing this begin to happen. And I think in some ways that secular humanist project of life without God that many millennials bought into, and I think some Gen Xers bought into, is beginning to dissipate. I think the Gen Z language is wrapped around the idea of, I get to determine my identity. I am the locus. I am the starting point for who I am. And from my individual experience, I interpret the rest of the world. Where the invitation, I think, of the kingdom is to say, actually, you are created in the image of God, and what is true about you starts from outside of you, not inside of you.
Oh, that's good, Collin. I love that. Mike, any?
I think going back to what you were talking about earlier, I think the story of every generation is that I can find my happiness outside of God.
Yeah.
I think that's the first sin. I don't think it was pride. I think it was really more curiosity. It was the idea essentially that, when Satan comes to Eve and comes to Adam, he's like, God's holding out on you. And they would never be more perfect than they were in that moment, never be more happy than they were in that moment. And then in that moment, they choose to rebel against God, which, a lot of people look at that and they think, that's not a big deal. They just bit a fruit or did something like that. Right. But what they did was they actually had to overcome goodness to embrace badness.
That's a word.
We have always been in badness and have had to try to reach for goodness. Yeah. And they had to do the opposite of that. And I think every generation has to figure out that same function for themselves. Like, what is our thing? Like in my generation, because I'm Gen X, we were the first latchkey students, or kids. And so we'd come home, our moms were gone, they were working, so we were by ourselves. So the lie that was in us is, you better take care of you because no one else will. Yeah. I have an entire generation of that, And then it seems like this next generation, the millennial generation, which is why I think that the boomers made fun of them, was there was a sensitivity there. Like, they didn't have identity, and because of that, they were vulnerable to all kinds of things. Anybody could come and speak something over their lives, and they would embrace that, or be afraid of that, or overwhelmed by that. I think as time's gone on, they've developed a different kind of identity. There's been growth. Like I said, they've become entrepreneurial, independent, creative. I think a lot of wonderful things about millennials. But I do think, and then we can go down to Gen Z, and I agree. I'm actually super encouraged by the Gen Z students we have, at our church, as well as the ones that I see on TikTok and Instagram. In fact, I'm flying out to California to go sit with Elijah Lamb. And I don't know if you know Elijah or not.
He's a brilliant apologist.
He's a brilliant apologist.
He's
21 years old. He's my son's best friend.
Yeah.
And this guy, I'm flying out there because I love him. I love his dad, and we just get to spend time with him. But he's influenced millions of people, just already being young like this. And there is a fire. I mean, we have a young adult kind of ministry thing that we do with older students, like, anywhere from like 18 up to like 24. And man, to watch them worship, it's different. I mean, different than a Sunday morning experience, Saturday night experience. I mean, they're on their knees and they're just pouring it out. I mean, it is functionally so different than what we normally experience that I think we're on the verge of a shift in worship in the way that weekends are done and all of that, because Gen Z takes over in about 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the key question that we're asking when we see this hunger in Gen Z and this hunger that's coming in Gen Alpha, right, is who will be there to mentor them?
Right.
Right. Who will be the fathers and mothers, the grandfathers and grandmothers that will help provide the right conditions for that flame of passion to be directed towards meaningful things. And I think that the key element is going to be a willingness for those that are within local churches to see that not as simply youthful idealism,
right,
but to see that as,
because it's dismissed when you see that.
But seeing as God awakening something in a generation that will accomplish components of the Great Commission that we may not be on this side of eternity able to see. And it might look different. Let's be honest, it might come across in some ways as a criticism or critique of how things were done prior. But I think the willingness to be not only patient, but to step in and say, I don't need to chase youth to fit in as an older leader. What I need to do is actually embrace this space and bring my wisdom and care and compassion to it. I think that that's what young leaders are thirsty for. And I think churches that are willing to create that space are going to be churches that are prepared to help impact their communities in the future. And churches that reject that are going to find themselves wondering where all their young people went, and hearing about the stories of their grandkids getting connected and making impact in other churches.
You know, I think I talked to our guys about this in our men's group, and we've got young guys all the way up to, guys in their 50s and 60s even. And I'm like, what we need to be for this next generation are spiritual fathers. Yeah. And I make the distinction between spiritual fathers and douchey dads. We don't need a bunch of guys who are just the cool hip dad. What we need is somebody with experience and some gravitas that's able to speak into another person's life. And I think it really begins to impact even the way that the church functions moving forward. We've traditionally got a whole system of bringing people into the church and putting them in leadership positions through seminaries and things like that. Collin and I both went to seminary, but I don't know how you feel about it, but I personally did not feel like it enhanced. It gave me some great Bible knowledge, but beyond that, taught me nothing about leading the church, nothing about spiritual warfare, nothing about how to endure, honestly, through really, really hard times. And to me, if we're going to be the church that mentors the next generation, that mentoring has to not be outside the church, has to be inside the church. Yeah. Theological education should come from the church. We've got enough books and we've got enough internet that we don't necessarily, in my mind, need to send them away for 3 years to go do that thing. My son's on his way up, and Connor is growing as a leader, and he's growing as a communicator. And we were talking about beforehand, like, I want Connor to leave Grace at some point and go spend some time in another church, seeing how things are done in an excellent way, and just get a broader view of the church than just what Grace Church is like, so that when he comes back and leads in some area of our ministry, or we plant him in his own church, whatever we do, he has a whole well-rounded kind of education. But there's a couple things I think that are necessary for that. One, we have to make ourselves available to these young men and these young women so that they can become the next generation leaders. Number two, I think we need to challenge Gen Z and Alpha to be the kind of humble, teachable people that they need to be. Because you're right. I mean, it's very, very hard for the older generation to hear someone young go, we're going to do it better than they did. And there is an arrogance to that kind of thing, for sure. But I also think the way for us to show that is to come listening, slow to speak, quick to listen, and have humility on our part. Yeah. And one of the things that we've done is, like I said earlier, we've given young people really big positions inside of our church and said, you have authority, act with authority, right? And I think when you're humble like that and not just dismissing them as inexperienced people who don't understand anything, it opens up a whole world. I mean, first of all, they're totally on board. They're excited about the opportunities. They can't believe you're giving them the opportunities to do what they're doing. And it just opens up a dialogue that's really healthy.
Yeah, and I think there's a responsibility that those that are aspiring to or feel a calling to serve God in his church or want to take opportunities to be mentored to come with a humble spirit. Yeah. And I think our responsibility as leaders, and what I think the local church would really benefit from, is continuing to, and if not already, prioritizing character over talent. Yeah. Like I try to tell the young guys in our community all the time, there will be more than enough sermons for you in your future if this is what God has called you to. But what prepares you for the platform and what authenticates the ministry is the internal character and integrity that you have over the long run. And I think too often we give people platforms that are talented, but we've yet to actually vet or invest in or evaluate their character. And I think the responsibility for young people is to say, hey, if you're in a community that values what God has placed in your life, and you've got a leader that you can trust, if they say no, that no maybe just means not yet, and your willingness to be faithful in the small over the long term is going to be a blessing. Too many leaders have gotten platforms too quickly with lack of character, hold that weight because of a skill or a gift or a talent, and they're crushed by it. And I wonder sometimes if they had been hidden longer, if they had been faithful in a place or had a leader tell them no more often, I wonder if they would have been more prepared for the weight of leadership. And I'm not just talking about pastoral leadership. I'm talking about family, marriage, running a business, leading a community, whatever that endeavor is. The more time we have prepared to develop our character by serving someone else, the more prepared we'll become when it's our turn to be the person who's the lead servant in any environment that we're in.
Yeah, somebody told me a long time ago that if, serving is beneath you, leadership is beyond you.
What a word. Yeah.
And I just feel like, man, that was so helpful to me. And I remember sitting with this guy who was leading a church of 7,000 people and just kind of a speaking rock star. And he's like, Mike, if you need to learn to follow before you can lead. And it was just I was young and I wanted to just jump on stage and I wanted to do my thing. And man, it was probably and possibly the best thing that he could have said to me. Did I like it in the moment? I didn't. I just felt like he was slowing me down. But as we planted Grace Church, I realized in the first several years, what he built inside of me was endurance. And I had a similar thing with my kids when they were young, especially Connor, because he's such a questioner, he's a learner. So the kid would fire off 500 questions a day at me, and finally one of the times I just said, hey, you just have to do what I'm asking you to do. And he goes, why do I have to do what you're telling me to do? And I said to him, I said, Connor, if you cannot obey a visible authority in your life, how are you going to obey an invisible authority in your life? And I just think it's one of those things I think we've got to teach the next generation. And I think you're 100% right. Character over talent. Now, it doesn't mean talent's not important. There are a lot of people who are in pulpits today that should not be in pulpits today. They're wonderful men, wonderful women, but they're not great. So I think the church has come along and developed the character and then also develop the talent that goes along with that as well.
I feel like what I've found sometimes for myself is if I will give ear to what they are good at, like the creativity, the ideas, at some point the character will kind of come to the surface because there'll inevitably be a crisis in their dating relationship, in something. And even though they have all these great ideas, they don't have the life experience. And that's when maybe if you listen to the Holy Spirit, you have the opportunity to say, hey, let me talk you through that. You may be way better than me at all this other stuff, and I love that. I want to learn from that. In this area, I have some scars, and I can help you with it. But see, I do take it, I love seminary. I feel like that was part of the discipline of learning to be someone who does hard things, like Clint, and I didn't get a seminary degree, but my husband did, and he's not bookish at all. So some of his suffering through all that, but I went to all the women's things. I think there's something of that education. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
I'm certainly not saying that you don't need to be educated. I think you have to be super educated, but I would take someone like Elijah who can stand toe to toe pretty much with anybody that's gone to seminary, and I think what we're seeing right now is just a shift in the educational transmission.
Yeah, the means by education is different.
Yeah. And so right now we can do things on the internet that are just spectacular. In fact, just the other day, I was watching these two guys on Instagram. They came across. They're like, we were in these top tier Ivy League schools, and what they realized was in this school, it was theory, not practice, and so they basically got together, raised a bunch of money, got that seed money, and have created like an online MBA program. But it's with the top leaders and innovators in all the country in their respective fields. And I'm like, that is so much more helpful. In fact, I had a professor at our Reformed Theological Seminary named Richard Pratt. He was a Harvard guy. And he would say this when we were there. He's like, theological education is going by the wayside. Like, he's like, I would do my entire career differently. And part of that was pushing it towards the church and real world experiences. Because you know what helped me a lot? This is why I put Connor in pastoral care. I want him to sit with someone. I want him to sit with someone who's dying in the hospital. Yeah. Because until I sat with someone dying in the hospital, everything was theoretical.
Right.
You know, when someone says to me in the last moments of their life, I don't know if I'm going to heaven, I don't get to throw my theology at them. I throw my Jesus at them, you know? And I think when you have those real world experiences, that is what shapes your character. You can't gain character through a book. You can gain experience and knowledge, but that wisdom only comes when you're engaged in the trenches of doing what Jesus did. And again, going back to Paul and Timothy, Paul calls him, you know, son, because they've gone through it together. Mm-hmm. You know, they went through hard things. Timothy watched Paul suffer and struggle and go through really challenging things. And then he was released after that. And that's, I mean, it's really what we're doing is going back to an old model of discipleship and mentorship.
Yeah, I think there's a hunger right now and a desire for people to, especially young people, I'll include millennials in this category, to say, hey, could you teach me how to life? Yeah. And I think part of it is this recognition that this is the most fatherless generation
100%.
That has ever been, at least in American history. And so there are so many just baseline things that young people grew up not knowing. How do I do my taxes? Mm-hmm. How do I
still don't know how to do that.
How do I
TurboTax?
Yeah.
I pay someone else.
Who do I pay to do that?
Right.
How do I ask someone out on a date? Mm-hmm. How do I deal with rejection? How do I deal with a bad performance review from my employer when I've been a straight A student my whole life? And I think so much of that is connected to having other spiritual fathers and mothers that you can connect with, relate to, who are willing to be vulnerable and authentic with their own stories. The way I would put it is like appropriately transparent, right? When it comes to their own journeys for the sake of the next generation to come. And I would say that one of the mistakes we can make is we can move to a version of over empathy in mentoring where we enmesh our personal lives with the lives of the person we're mentoring. And I think what this season calls for is a high degree of healthy differentiation, a recognition that when I take a young person to coffee and there's a young guy that wants to plant a church, I don't need to spend the majority of the time talking about my personal experience. My job is to listen to what this young man needs and to be able to share a story that's going to be helpful for him in this moment. And I think if we, I've talked to a number of people that feel like they've mentored people in the past and felt burned by the relationship. They didn't call me when I thought they would. They
the person being mentored felt burned?
The person mentoring.
Okay.
So I hear this a good bit. Hey, I'm out on the mentoring thing. I tried it once and it just didn't give me what I needed. And in that very essence, we're missing the point, right? If I go into a mentoring relationship assuming that I need to get as much out of it as I'm giving to it, I've missed the point. And so if we can cultivate compassionately differentiated leaders, spiritual fathers and mothers that recognize every person on our staff team, every young person who's a rock star at our church doesn't actually belong to us. We are stewards of those people for whatever season God entrusts us with them. Then we can release them well and celebrate the next thing that God has for them and not feel the woundedness to say, well, I'm not going to do that again.
So, Collin, you wrote your dissertation on Gen Z and the future of the church. I'm just curious, what were some of your biggest insights?
Yeah, I think I've shared a number of them kind of weaved into the nature of today's discussion. If I had to summarize it, I'd say one of those key elements is the church leadership that is a generation above needs to focus on mentoring as a key element and discipline. We can't see mentoring as if we can get to it, that's great vision. The second thing that I would say is that Gen Z Christians, as a general rule from my research, grew up in environments where they had an understanding of Jesus Christ as Savior, but not as Jesus Christ as Lord. And part of our responsibility is to help people understand that discipleship to Jesus means surrendering every nook, cranny, and crevice of my life to the God who saves me. And so the way that we teach, the way that we coach, and the way that we mentor the next generation, which Gen Z is now young parents in our churches, is we need to help them understand and teach them in such a way and engage them in environments where they're able to wrestle through what does it mean to follow Jesus completely and wholly, because that may not be the vision of Christianity that they were given as children, depending upon their church environment.
If I could go to your first point for just a second about mentorship. So when you say that churches need to prioritize it, it can't just be if we can get to it. Are you talking about like in a very strategic kind of way, or are you saying in a more organic, like we're teaching our people to do life on life?
Yeah, the answer is yes to both.
Both.
Yeah, and I think so much it depends on church context. I mean, we find that in some church environments, the best way to do that is going to be on Sunday morning in the teaching window, because that's what's culturally appropriate for that demographic or for that community that's being reached. For others, it might be a more systematized process where somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I want to grow in Christian maturity, and here's the person or group of people that I'm going to be serving with and engaging with. And it can look like a system or a program. On the other side, I think it's mostly about culture. It's like, do we have a culture that celebrates mentorship when we see it? What's rewarded is repeated. Are the stories we're telling in our sermons stories that are about people in our church reaching out to make an impact by serving others? Are we lifting up the student ministry volunteers and seeing them not as like, a place to serve, but are we seeing them as vital to the mission of the church? Are those that are serving in kids ministry vital to the mission of the church, or is that the option to say yes if you kind of don't know where to serve? And so I think so much of it's about language and culture, and also depending on the context, I think language and culture will determine what the right systems are for every local church.
You talk, Mike, about having different mentors for different aspects of your life.
Yep.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
It fits in really well because I don't think there is one mentor for all areas of your life. In fact, I have probably 7 different mentors in my life that speak into different areas. I mean, I have a fitness mentor, I have a financial mentor, I have a spiritual life mentor, I have a relationship mentor, just all kinds of those kinds of things, because each one of these guys is uniquely gifted by God to have that as their primary thing. I'm going to attach to that, learn from that, and grow from that, right? So I think a big piece of that for how we treat other people is to realize I'm not going to be all things to all people. So I'm going to give you what I can give you,
yes,
and then I'm going to push you on and say, hey, it's kind of like what you're saying. They're not here for me. I'm here for them,
right.
And as a result of that, once I've given you what's necessary that I can give to you, I'm going to push you on to somebody else. I think it's important to do that, and if you don't do that, what were you going to say?
Well, it's just funny because I don't think of them as mentors. I have a financial guy I go and see. I don't think of him as my mentor. He just tells me what to do with my money. I have coaches at my gym I go to. I don't think of them as like mentors. How would you define mentorship?
Coaching.
Any kind of coaching.
Yeah. I see. Well, I mean, I see it as coaching. I'm probably a little bit more of the share story guy than Collin is in the mentoring relationship. So for me, I have relationships with all these people.
Right.
So it's relationships and it's coaching. But I want to extract something from. So if I'm extracting something from you and not just relating to you and having fun with you and engaging with you, I consider that a mentor. And I would also say too, like having grown up without a father for the most part, or at least a good father, I spent a lot of time having mentors at a distance. Like I watched men in our church when I first became a Christian. And I think imitation, honestly, it's the first thing. I mean, Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. He didn't just say follow Christ. He said, follow me as I do it. Watch how I follow Jesus, right? And so I would watch guys from a distance. I mean, so much so that when I was 17, there was a guy in our church. I mean, this guy, he had a blue button-down polo. I went out and bought a blue button-down polo, tan pants, loafers.
Original influencer, right?
Yeah. And so I watched him. He had a beautiful wife. He had a great life, wonderful house. And I was like, these are some of the things that I want in my life. And so I was able to just kind of watch his life and see the outcome of his life. I don't think you really, like with people, at least for me, I don't watch the words of a person's life as much as I watch the outcomes of their lives. Because when I see the outcomes of their life is a kind of outcome that I prefer, then that's someone that I'm going to attach myself to and say, I need something from that person. And it's also the same reason why I can give something, because I know I have this thing that you need, and it's helpful for me to be able to transfer that to you.
But at the beginning, it sounds like it was more you were just enamored with him, because his clothes, his wife.
I would definitely not say that I was enamored with him, but yes.
Well, I mean, you didn't know his character when you were just looking at this guy, right?
Yeah. No, because I wasn't looking for that from him. That's why, like my financial guy, I need him to be a moral person. I need him to be a decent person. But what I'm asking for is, how do I get from point A to point B?
Yeah.
You know, and he has that wisdom, and that's all I need from him, you know?
So I call it a bullpen.
Yeah.
Right? Like, depending on time and score, I'm going to need a different guy pitching. And you call on different people in different seasons for different results. And I think so often the pressure that a person can feel, which is why they're out on mentoring, is I don't have the time, margin, or capacity to be all things to all people. Right. I can't do that to one person, right? Much less more than that. And I think when we see the church, this is the beauty of the local church, when we see the local church as a constellation of people from which we can gain and learn and grow, all of a sudden that fabric becomes all the more important. And this is why who you choose to be around, frankly, in my opinion, what local church you choose to attend 100%. Has a profound effect on the outcomes of your life. There's this phrase that Gladwell coins called the Miami effect. He was asking this question: why is there so much more insurance fraud in Miami? And the reason why, the number's crazy. The reason why is because the common idea among many people when interviewed was, well, everybody's doing it. And so the reality is like, depending on where you choose to live, what friends you choose to be intentional about having your family around, and what local church you attend has a profound effect. Your external environment has a massive impact on the wherewithal and direction of the people in your home. And so when we think about cultivating a culture for the next generation, one of the challenges I would put before parents is like, don't pick a church because the kids just like it, but definitely don't pick a church if the kids don't. Yeah. Because this is an important environment and place where you want to find people that are going to partner with you to raise your kids. And if that means that some churches are larger than others, okay. I think part of it is a stewardship question. Are we going to be committed to the next generation? And I see churches that are committed to the next generation having generational legacies, and churches that don't. They won't.
You're the average of, the leadership gurus always tell you that you're the average of the 5 people that you hang around most.
Yeah.
I just think that's very important. You have to curate the people that are in your life. And that means, because we don't have capacity to be all things to all people and friends with everyone, I think you have to find the people who are dead center in the mission of what God's called you to do.
Yeah.
That's why Collin and I love the local church, right? And that's why I like hanging out with them, because we strategize and we talk and we think through things and we, push each other. And I love that, But there aren't a lot of people that have that same experience in Orlando for us to be able to do that with. And so when you have those people in your life, you're always going to extract the right kinds of things, the right kinds of information. And if you're a person who needs mentoring, because, when I was a therapist, when I was a counselor, I always thought that, half the people that came were what I would call the worried well. They're okay, they're fine, but they just weren't parented. They need reparenting. And so we have we have 2 or 3 generations from the baby boomers down that needed to be reparented. And I think that's part of the process of what we're doing in the church, So we will talk about it through weekend messages, but we will also, like right now, at the end of this month, we're starting a giant mentoring thing. So we've been recruiting for the last 6 or 8 months mentors, great men and women inside our church that are going to be available for people who sign up for mentoring in these specific ways.
So you're systematizing it.
We're systematizing it. And I've never seen it, honestly, done like how we're doing it. And I'm excited to see what the outcome will be, because I think it's going to accelerate people's lives. I really do. And it's going to be in all these different ways, like finances and relationships and all these kind of things. And, the people have gone through the struggles, they've gone through that, they're able to transfer that to somebody else. You get to avoid the pitfalls somebody else fell in because they share their story with you.
And we're excited to see how it goes at Grace because,
As your
to
tester.
Pastor Mike's point, because of the dynamic of our relationship, I trust and know that the best parts of what Grace experiences through that is something that our church is going to benefit from. And again, that's the context of relationship. Are you putting yourself in environments and places, being intentional about your time and relationships so that you might be able to accomplish and step into the things that God has called you to?
I want to push y'all just for a second on the whole intentionality piece because I know you're both crazy busy. I guarantee there's a lot of guys, and women even, who would want to be mentored by both of you. And you just said something there, Mike, where like you have to look at who's in line with your kind of mission, what God's called you to.
Yeah.
How do you decide? There's no way you guys could say yes to mentoring every single person that asks. How do you decide who you're going to invest in?
Yeah. I think at this, well, first of all, you mentioned women. First of all, I'm not going to mentor women on my own.
But to your point about the different types of whatever, you know, you could have a male, female. Like I have male coaches at my gym.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
My financial guy's male. Maybe
Right.
that's why I don't consider them mentors. Maybe
Right.
we don't. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So for me, it's going to be people who are in the same genre of what we're doing, like people who are headed towards ministry, people who value the local church. So ministry is a broad category. To me, I want to invest in people who want to invest in Central Florida and who are headed towards pastoral ministry and leading the church. Those are the
Okay.
people that I want to invest in the most.
Because that's your life's mission, so it intersects. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of that's going to be both in my head, and these are just assessments that I'm going to do in my head, not necessarily out loud with the person. It's going to be character, it's going to be competence, you know, and chemistry. Yeah, those three things that we talk about a lot. And if those three things hit with each other, then if one of those things is out of whack, I'm not doing it because I really have. I mean, I am busy.
Limited resources, absolutely.
Yeah, so the people that I'm going to invest in, I'm praying that they're leading thousands of people, you know, not just a couple.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's a combination of a couple things. Like one is, there are a lot of people that want to take, but have yet to show through their diligence and their faithfulness that they're good stewards what's already been placed in their hand. And so in the same way that God calls us to be stewards, part of that is stewardship of time. And so when it comes to time, I think through this lens of every yes is a no to something else. I am married to Stacy. I have 4 children that I love, and I have a local church that God has entrusted to my care. And so when it comes to choices around how I invest any time, the question is, how does that align with my already existing commitments that I'm unwilling to compromise on? And so oftentimes what that looks like is come join me as I'm doing the thing that I'm doing. And if you're not interested in that, then that probably is an indicator that I'm not the right person to be mentoring or coaching you. My wife and I think about that together. I mean, one of the things I love about Pastor Mike and Kelly is the way that they work together. And Stacey and I are in the same way. We are lockstep, unified, one-to-one with one another. And so in so many ways, it's an ongoing discussion with Stacey around who are the people in a particular season of our life that we feel called to invest in. And that's usually going to be an indicator of the decision that we make. And Stacey always holds the no card. If Stacey says, hey, I don't think that individual or this season is the right opportunity for you to be serving in that way or to be leading in that way or investing in that way, then the answer is no. And the other thing I would say that's kind of important is, and I know that Pastor Mike and I feel the same way, God's given us a stewardship to open his word every single Sunday, and there are thousands of people that come to hear God's word, and that is mentorship in and of itself.
Yes.
There are thousands of people that have been impacted and influenced by the words that God gives Pastor Mike, and it's a sacred trust. And the time that's spent in prayer, the time that's spent scouring the scriptures, the time that is spent meeting with people over the course of the week to accomplish that pastoral call, in and of itself is made known on the weekend. And so I never want the weekend to be the exclusive place to which we are, mentoring or discipling people, but it is a strategic place that God has entrusted to our care. And so, at the end of the day, it's like my first call is to my wife, then it's to these kids, and then it's to the local church. And frankly, in this season of life, I'm okay recognizing that that's where the majority of my time is going to be.
And I don't think people receive that well sometimes. When I was a young pastor, Buddy and I went up to North Point. And so we watched Andy Stanley preach his message. Then I made my way up front, elbowing people out of the way. And I shook his hand. I said, Andy, that was a great message. Can I get 10 minutes of your time? And he goes, no. Just like that. He goes, no. And I remember thinking to myself, what a jerk, And I just didn't know. I didn't have any responsibilities, I was like, you can spend 10 minutes. And he goes, listen. He goes, I have 16,000 people that want 10 minutes with me. And I was like, you're still a jerk, And I was just thinking that in my head. It wasn't until years later I was like, no, he's not a jerk at all. No. And he said to me, he goes, everything that I am is in my messages or in my books, And I was like, I get it. But I think sometimes the way that you say that, because Andy's just kind of he's very direct. Here's how I would change that whole thing. I would say, because this is what I do as well. Like if you want to talk with me, sometimes it's going to be on a drive, going from here to here instead of having a sit down meeting with you. So, yes, I want to talk with you. I value that, but I can do it in these 20 minutes. I don't have an hour right now. I'm driving here. We'll talk in the car, and that's how I can do that. And what I found is most people will respond to that really well because you validate that in the moment and are able to say, I want to talk to you. And then there are some people just straight up my admin, Carrie, just does not allow in. And that's like any pastor who has more than 300 people, that's the role of the admin that person has. Super helpful.
We say this at our New Here class, or if people want to hear more about the church. We say this every single time. Our job as leaders of the church is not to take care of you. Our job is to ensure that there are great leaders in our community that can help you be taken care of. And the responsibility that we have is not to be all things to all people. Right. We can't be that. What we can do is use the gifts that God has given us, the strategy that God has given us, and the opportunities that God has given us to create environments and places and spaces where people who are serious about wanting to grow in their spiritual faith in their journey can have good relationships with meaningful people to do that. And together we can create that kind of community.
Yeah, and I really genuinely believe there's a humility in that, because what we're saying in essence is, first of all, my team is greater than me, and secondly, what we're saying is I'm not Jesus. So I just have, and I know that sounds weird, but people, and I know they do the same thing to you, but people will come up and be like, dude, you've changed my life. I will never be the same because of you. But I have this thing that a pastor told me when I first became a pastor. He said, Mike, people will tell you that you're great. He said, every time you hear that, remember you're not everything they say you are. And then when somebody comes and tears you down, remember you're not everything they say you are. And I just thought that was so helpful and so wise. So that's how I hear that every single time that happens. But I think there's a humility in recognizing that you're not the center of the universe, and because of that, somebody else can do your wedding.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be Pastor Mike that does the wedding. And I understand why. I mean, they hear us teaching on the weekends, they feel connected to us, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful that the Lord has given us the capacity to be able to communicate in such a way where people walk away going, that was helpful to my life. And of course, when that happens, there's going to be fond affection that transfers with that, right? That's a big deal. We totally get that. That's a stewardship, though. But Colin's right. I mean, when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. And a lot of times, we're saying no to the wrong things. Right. We're saying yes to the wrong things, rather, and we're saying no to the right things. And that's just not healthy, because ministry is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And if you continue to do that, eventually it's just going to deteriorate the most important relationships in your life.
I think there has to be a Holy Spirit element too, because I do love that you are the guy who went to hear a 12-year-old share his testimony. And when you first said that story, my first thought was that you're a little bit like that 12-year-old boy. You had a lot of giftedness in you, and you wanted a small thing in your mind, like a crumb from this big guy, and he didn't see it at all, which he's fair and right to do, right. To your point. But I think every now and then, it's if you're really led by the Holy Spirit, my prayer is would you open my eyes to see that maybe he could go, let me give this guy 10 minutes. Who knows what he's going to do with that 10 minutes? He could impact 10,000 people with it. Right. I do appreciate that about you. I remember one time, I can't remember what it was, but maybe you came to, I can't remember. Some woman was like a nurse, and she came up to you off to the side and just said, same thing, you've changed my life, when she wanted to hug you. And I remember you and I talking later, and I said, Mike, I like that she could do that. It's not like, well, let me schedule you with my secretary. I'll hug you in 2 months when I get 1 minute to hear your whole, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like there's still an accessibility to you, I guess, that I think maybe has to be Holy Spirit led.
Yeah.
But I think it's appreciative. Tell me this. Give us a final word to some of our younger listeners. Maybe you're listening going, okay, I would like a mentor in my life. I think I have a lot of growth to do. I'm overwhelmed. Where do I even begin?
Yeah.
What's a simple step?
So a simple step is watch the outcome of the person's life, not the person's words. There are a lot of really gifted communicators in the world, and a lot of really gifted communicators that are fools. And so the scriptures are clear. A good tree produces good fruit. And if you're watching somebody, and I see preachers like this a lot. I mean, I won't name, big name preachers, but I think we can all probably think of, guys out there who all they do is just run down their detractors, yell at people in their congregations, and there's not a whole lot of Jesus there. And they're famous, but that means nothing if there's not a lot of Jesus, And so first and foremost, just like I told my daughter, like when you get serious about a guy one day, he's got to love Jesus more than he loves you. Because if he loves Jesus more than he loves you, he'll love you well.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think that's exactly what you're looking for in a mentor. Does he love Jesus really, really well? And what is the outcome of that person's life? And if you can put those two things together, they love Jesus with all their heart, the outcome of their life is what you're looking for, then that's a person you should pursue with all your heart.
I love it.
It's a great word. Yeah, I would say twofold. One, if you are looking for great mentors or looking for coaches that can help you grow and develop, because that's the desire of your heart, find a local church and get fully involved and invested. There is nothing that can replace the relational connection that comes from showing up week in, week out, day in, day out, and giving your life to a particular community in an environment where you can be known. And I think if you're faithful to that end, with eyes open and a heart prepared to receive what God has from you, for you, from the teaching of his word on the weekend, and then in the context of community, I think God has this really great way of bringing about the right people at the right time in the right moments when you need them most. He's a good provider. And I think about even in our own journey, I think God has brought Grace and Pastor Mike and Kelly. He brought us to them at the right time in the right moment in our own stories. And I think if we can continue to be people that are faithful to the thing God has called us to do, more often than not, I find that God is a really good provider, and he'll give us what we need right when we need it.
Awesome. Thank you guys both so much.
Thanks, Jeanne.
Thank you.
Grace After Hours is a production of Grace Church in Orlando, Florida. Grace's mission is helping people take their next step toward Christ. Learn more at discovergrace.com. If you enjoy this podcast, share it with someone you know and subscribe so you never miss an episode.